Hi, Chelsea.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
I am good. So, as you know, we always try to come back to some new topic every week. And I was actually talking with my family, they're all firefighters, and we were talking about how many fires they see that start that could have been prevented. Um, and then they have to respond to them. So it reminded me actually of cybersecurity. And if there's maybe one route or the other you should be taking on where your focus lies.
Prevention versus reacting and putting the fires out versus stopping them in the first place. Yeah, well, I love analogies, and I think this is a great one. It'll relate very directly to cybersecurity. So maybe a way to phrase it is it more important to focus on fighting cyber fires or preventing them in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
Fair
Agreed.
question. All right, well then
Fair
let's
question.
explain. Let's explain a little bit.
We have some splaining to do.
So I love the analogy. I think, and we talked about this a little bit, of course. I think it's a perfect fit. I want to focus on the analogy of it first and talk a little bit more about the fire side of things. But to help us with this today, we have a guest in the studio here with me, Jimmy Augustine, my buddy Jimmy from Ingram Micro, who is another fellow evangelist, I believe in your title, another cyber evangelist. And I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, but I know you have some perspective on this. We have some stories to share on this idea of proactive versus reactive, which is how we'll rephrase it. But say hi and
awesome. Thank you, Eric. Nice to be here. I appreciate the invite. And you and I do share a lot of common perspectives on security at large and in general. I am a chief technology evangelist for Ingram Micro's security business. And my main job is to put together solutions that resonate and solve pervasive customer issues.
That's great. For anyone who doesn't know, Ingram Micro is not a direct vendor. You don't necessarily do business with them directly unless you're a reseller, and that's kind of you're in between the vendors, the manufacturers, and the resale chain. And so your customers are resellers, and you kind of provide insight and you get to evangelize, but also help vet some of those vendors, which I want to get to a little bit later in talking about how to know which vendors are which and which are good to work with and work with the reseller side to help them know what the solutions do and help enable customers by solving problems, which we'll get into a little bit as well. Because that's, I think, our what both of us have a passion for is solving problems, not just selling stuff.
Correct.
And that's why we're here. And we get to talk about these things as a what is the problem and how do we solve it? And I think that's where Chelsea hit on a really interesting analog for cybersecurity issues of firefighting. As a firefighter, your family in the firefighting first responder kind of job deals with remediation. They deal with there is a fire primarily, and there's probably a lot more to this. And I'd love to talk to them sometime. Maybe they should be guests. Talk about the idea of mostly they're called when there is a fire and they put it out. They try and stop it from spreading, stop it from save people, help protect people and property after the fact. But I know there's a little bit of prevention in their job as well. Like they are tasked. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, every time that I move in to a new place, my family comes through and they make sure that everything, like it's exhausting. They make sure everything is up to code and stuff like that. Because they want to minimize the risk of me ever needing to call the fire department, you know? But if I ever needed to, yeah, they're going to come respond.
Yeah, I think that's the key. They would rather not have to come put out fires. They would rather they're not, well, from a job security perspective. but I bet most of them would say they would rather spend their whole shift in the firehouse, eating pizza, playing poker, and hanging out. Eventually get a little boring, but then maybe they shift their jobs to being more proactive and going out and doing more free home inspections or outreach and meeting with kids in schools or whatever. But I know that's, part of their thing is they would rather the fires not happen.
Right.
And if they can prevent it, that's great. But they can't prevent everything, and that's why you still have to have firefighters.
Well, and they're not equipped to, I don't think, do all of the legwork of even vetting if you're equipped or not. They're responding for you, yes, every day.
Yeah.
Anytime you need them. But I think that's a whole different aspect of it too.
There's a whole other thing we can get into, and maybe we'll touch on a little later, the equation of risk as a factor of threat and vulnerability. And it does tie in here where you can't totally prevent the risk of fire.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be some threat, but you can reduce the impact of it by being prepared and maybe by having fire extinguishers in the house, having smoke detectors, which won't prevent the fire. They won't save you, but they'll help alert you to the fact that you need to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe as early as possible. I think all of those have great analogies in cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to kind of start to make that connection a little bit more and talk to Jimmy from the cybersecurity side and the product solution side. Is it common to kind of think of vendors in those categories of preventative that might stop bad stuff from happening versus reactive and remediative of something bad did happen or will happen? We're going to make sure that we can minimize the impact and the devastation.
I think that's a great point, Eric. And what we see is about 5 to 10% of our customer base is trying to make a pivot away from being 100% reactive with their clients to some, middle of the road, approach. And so a lot of our customers are trying to be more proactive, and they're bringing certain tools like vulnerability management to the equation. They're bringing zero trust to the equation. Both taken together can help their customers be more proactive than reactive. And I think there's a happy medium. There's a compromise between how much I could spend on being proactive and how much I can spend on being reactive. And, we don't have a number per se, but it's something that we are starting to ask. And I think over time, the security industry will say, okay, 10, 15% to being proactive. So that's vulnerability management, zero trust, and the rest is going to be reactive. You're going to have both because you're not going to be able to prevent every forest fire that starts.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the challenge, but there is a financial equation there. It does all come down to money and time and other things and functionality. We talk about this as functionality versus security.
Mm-hmm.
To be fully functional, just open up everything,
Mm-hmm.
let it all be free and everyone can access whatever they want. But that is very insecure. At the opposite end of the spectrum, to be completely secure, shut off all access. You have zero access. Of course, you have zero functionality. It's secure, but it's useless.
Right.
And the real world has to be somewhere in the middle. And it's similar here with fires. You can't live your life with no fire. I mean, I suppose you could at the ultimate prevention. You say no playing with matches. That's an easy one. But no having fires in your fireplace is another extreme and inconvenience.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a safe way to do it.
Also, that's like saying your kids won't play with matches. You don't know.
You can only do so much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can tell them not to, but they still might.
It's a great point. Again, the analogy can keep going and we can keep diving in, but I think that's a great example. And you mentioned forest fires as well. You've left the house. You don't have the smoke detectors. You don't have your fire extinguishers. There's being responsible and there's being irresponsible. And you can post all the signs you want and have cute bears telling you, don't play with fire in the forest, especially in drought season. And yet people do.
Mm-hmm.
Or here we'll throw in another wrench here. There are times that it's not somebody being irresponsible, but lightning. Mm-hmm. There are natural things that can cause a fire in a dry wood that lead to horrible wildfires. It's not always something you can even stop if you want.
Right. Well, it's akin to what we do with endpoint detection and response. We have to detect the issue at hand. And I would imagine that, the U.S. federal government and certain states, like California, where forest fires are greatest, they're employing technology that allows them to see a new fire starting to take off with tools and technology. So I can detect that there's something that we need to go investigate. And it may not be a material risk, but we still need to go look at it, right? And then there could be other situations where through machine vision, you could see that this really is not a fire that we need to be alarmed about. The local fire department's got it under control. And so there's a level of comfort there, but you also, again, have that detection capability.
So it's kind of the macro level of fire for the micro being smoke detectors in the home. It's and they're not always true. Could be you just burnt something on the stove or your microwave popcorn for a couple minutes too much.
Right.
It's not really a fire. It's not really even a danger, but you have to figure that out.
Right.
And the detector alerts you to it at least so you can make the informed decision.
Right.
That's what I had, like a specific question, literally very much along these lines. Do you think there's a way to vet value on if you have a smoke detector that automatically calls someone to respond to it, or if it just alerts you? And how do you even vet that?
Well, that goes back to the cyber version of DR, whether it's MDR, XDR, all the DRs, which are detect and response.
Right.
That's what the DR stands for in all those acronyms.
Right.
And that means there's supposed to be both. And they vary on how strong of a response they take.
Right.
Some of the responses are sending alerts, which is what you're talking about directly, is it'll alert the fire department. But then in theory, they're then going to send a truck.
Right.
With hoses and water to potentially, if they do find a fire, put it out.
Right.
Or if they just find smoke, maybe put a fan in to kind of clear the smoke. And actually, I have a story of this one time. I don't want to embarrass my family, but when someone was looking after my children, had a fire in our fireplace, but didn't open the flue. Wasn't really a major fire hazard, but it created a lot of smoke in the house.
I would imagine.
So they exited the house. Fire department had to come and put up the big fans and start clearing the house of smoke. It happens, but the smoke detectors did go off. They didn't need them. They knew there was smoke before they even went off. So they took the kids out and called 911. But I think all this is great examples of what we see in the cyber side, and there's varying degrees of that detection and response. And it's, I think, almost muddied the marketplace and the solutions that are out there, because everyone claims our solution is the best.
Right.
And yet they're not even clear on what it really does. And both the detecting and the responding are important. But neither one of those is actually talking about that other factor we talked about, is the preparedness and avoidance of problems in the first place. To detect and respond is vital.
Right.
But in an ideal world, you wouldn't actually activate either. The smoke detectors would never go off because you never have a fire.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about DR, detection and response. I used to work at IBM in their services business, and we had a disaster recovery business, and I was responsible for the marketing of that service. And the one thing that stuck with me is that the very first thing you do in looking at your business services across the company is you try to quantify the business impact if something was to go materially wrong, right? If I have a fire, or there's lightning, or there's a hurricane, there's a tornado, what's the business impact of that process no longer being online? And so I was talking with a customer yesterday, and he brought up a point that CISOs are trying to move away from not necessarily the risk situation, but they are now helping the business look at the business impact for certain processes. And CISOs are not responsible for executing the business process. That's the purview of the CIO and the line of business that owns that business process, right? So he was agitating for, let's go back to business impact. And that's something that we need to do, not only look at the cost of a disaster, right? Or a hack, a cyber hack, but also, okay, so if this is offline, this is how much revenue we're going to miss out on.
It comes back to a financial equation again. Then if it's going to cost the business $1 million a day, if we're down due to something we can't maybe even control,
right?
And we can have a DR site set up a couple states away,
right,
for $1,000 a month,
right?
That's potentially a no-brainer. But there's also the likelihood. It's not just the cost of that being down, but you factor in the likelihood of it actually happening.
Bingo.
And you'll get that math that'll come up with okay, it's reasonable to spend up to $5,000 a month.
Bingo.
Versus, if it's 10,000, it's not worth it. We'll run the risk. If we're down, we're going to lose more or lose less than if we had invested all that money for years and years and years and never needed it. And that comes back to the whole idea of what's it worth, and is it more important to spend money to stop it or to just spend the money to recover?
And the example I always used when I was at IBM was e-commerce. So what's the business impact of your e-commerce service going offline? Well, when you do that, you understand, well, that's not only a revenue impact, but it's our ability to stay open as a business. There's a lot of businesses that are hacked, SMB businesses that are hacked, and they can never get back online, or the cost of doing so is too high for them, right? And they probably didn't have the right insurance in place for that disaster. So you actually are able to say, okay, 40% of all SMBs that are hacked go out of business in 12 months. And that's very powerful when you think about it. But we're not trying to scare folks. What we're trying to do is help them be more fact-based and using business impact as a guiding light.
Yeah, and I think that's the important piece. You touched on a couple of things I really want to dive a little deeper into. One of them being insurance.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned insurance. I think that's a big factor in this. We talk about homeowners insurance as something you have to have.
Right.
And that's kind of your backup. That's your DR.
Right.
The other DR, disaster recovery. We have detection and response,
right,
usually with another letter in front of it. But there's also disaster recovery. Insurance for your home is your disaster recovery. If my house burns down, in theory, if everything's correct, and we'll talk about this because there's factors in this, the insurance company helps me then replace the house or buy a new house or whatever and still have a home. That's what you have homeowners insurance for, or smaller stuff. It doesn't have to be totally burnt down. If there's just fire damage or whatever, that's what homeowners insurance is for. And that insurance, they're great. Insurers are wonderful at doing that math, figuring out that financial equation to see what is the likelihood this will happen, what's going to be the cost to replace or recover from whatever the damage is.
Mm-hmm.
So then what should the premium be?
Mm.
Because their whole idea is they need to be making at least a little bit more than they're spending.
Yeah.
And the insurers are wonderful at it, which is why you see so many commercials for insurance. They're obviously making money. And yet people who need to make a claim and get their claims paid out, thank God they had it because they were able to recover and not financially devastate their family forever. And that plays directly into cyber as well. And I want to focus a little more on that insurance aspect because I think that helps drive this discussion. The insurance is the recovery, but they care a lot about prevention as well because they'd rather your home not burn down and them have to pay out. So the insurers want you to be prepared. They want you to have smoke detectors. They want you to have fire extinguishers.
Right.
Question, and what if you have all the tools in place and your insurance still doesn't want to show up at the end of, you know what I mean? I'm like,
well, they never want to.
Does that translate into cybersecurity too?
Well, they look for ways to get out of it. And back to the fire side, and your family could probably validate this, that they always want to know what the cause of the fire was. And they'll do investigation to figure out what started this. Was this lightning struck outside the house and ignited something, and that's what led to it?
Are you at fault? Yeah.
Or did you have a bonfire on the living room floor because you don't have a fireplace? Okay, they're not going to pay out because you did something that's totally a violation. Or even, was there faulty wiring you mentioned earlier that either started the fire or made it worse?
Right.
That or were your smoke detectors? You didn't replace your batteries. You smashed them because they were beeping. You couldn't figure out which one it was, and you just destroyed them all. And that led to other factors. So they always want to know what caused it to try and get out of paying out.
Well, it's funny to say that because I look at cybersecurity as a mechanism to control and mitigate your risk, which is really the role of insurance to a large degree. And one of the things that I think has helped our industry tremendously over the last 5 years is insurance companies coming up with these new cyber insurance policies for companies. So I mentioned, SMBs going out of business because they can't recover. Well, that's where cyber insurance comes into play. It will help you get back online and pay for that recovery. And I think cyber insurance has been a blessing for the industry, generally speaking, because it really, when in order to even qualify for cyber insurance, you have to have these 10 things in place: endpoint detection and response, DR, email security, and you just go down the list. And so that's actually spurred a lot of activity within users, because they want to go and get that insurance so they can lower their risk. And risk management and mitigation is the role of cybersecurity.
I'd fully agree. And I think, and I've said this somewhat controversially because some people disagree, or they find insurance painful.
Mm-hmm.
They find regulation painful.
Mm-hmm.
But both of those things help drive better hygiene, better cyber hygiene, better preparedness. And I think that's a good thing. It's just often they're doing it just because they have to and they resent it. But it's still a good idea. We gave you years on your own to try and do the right thing and be secure. You didn't do it, so now we're forcing your hand, especially in certain regulated industries that are critical infrastructure or for other reasons. The insurance aspect, whether you're regulated or not, it's doing similar things, and they lean back on similar requirements because they're good ideas. Don't have bonfires in your living room. If you do, we're not going to pay out, and you're going to be on your own. So they've helped further the cause of cybersecurity. You need to have these things, like you mentioned, either to get your insurance in the first place or to reduce your premiums. So you're paying less, and that makes it a financial incentive. And in the case of compliance and regulation, we saw something similar where they said, if you're not doing these things, we're going to fine you.
Right.
And there were many times over the last years, as regulations got stronger and stronger and more pervasive, that the cost of the fines is significantly more than the cost of the remediation, which makes it very easy to say, yes, the budget is there to do this thing, because it's not an if it eventually happens, it's a come next year, this is going to happen, we're going to be fined. So let's make sure we do those things now.
Right.
So I think both of those were very important in furthering this. And I think we almost have something similar when we talk about the fire aspect and home ownership. To get homeowners insurance, you need inspections. You need to have things done. When you make additions or modifications to your home, you have to stay up to code. Seems like a painful thing, but that's to make sure that you don't become part of the problem.
Right.
I was going to say, you don't want to pay it until you need it. And then you wish you had it.
Yeah. Well, insurance is always that way. You hope you never have to make a claim, but that day you do, you're real. You kept up with your premiums.
Yeah.
And I don't think cybersecurity professionals can reside or just rest on the idea of cyber insurance. We all know insurance companies are very, very strict in terms of how they pay out when there is an incident. So that's why it's incumbent upon the security folks to make sure they're doing the right things, so that in case there is a fire, they can put it out, right, as quickly as possible. But I go back to being proactive. What can I do to help our business be more secure? And that's where vulnerability management comes into play. I think it's just, for me, it's basic blocking and tackling. Yeah, we've got endpoint detection, we've got email security, but do we really know the true risk in our organization, or even outside of the organization where cloud services come into play? What level of risk am I taking on with e-commerce being run in AWS? So that becomes very material.
Yeah, I strongly agree. And I think that's, so we just talked a lot about insurance and regulation. I think that's just been one way to force the hand and kind of drive the motivation and take it out of a decision you can make because you should into you have to. And they help.
Right.
But to go back to just doing the right thing and best practice, it's a little more free and flexible, but there are still simple things that everyone should be doing. And I think sometimes they miss that. Or I've talked about this in other cases as well, where teams are understaffed as it is. Within organizations, cybersecurity is so understaffed and we need more folks. So they're all busy, but are they busy doing the right things? I'm talking about this again somewhere soon. The idea that they're full out, being productive.
Right.
But could they be doing things with that limited time that would be more productive and more valuable? And that comes down to that evaluation of whether it's a financial evaluation or just a risk-based evaluation of what is our biggest risk What is some of the things that we could do that are easy to do to move the needle towards security better? And I think some of that just comes down to the products. And you can simply say, okay, is this product, if you start looking at the solutions as preventative, if it works, if it's 90% effective in preventing this particular thing, and it costs half what the recovery would. Again, I don't want to get into the math. You can do that endlessly, and there's no perfect equation, but you can do that analysis yourself of all those projects you're looking at.
Right.
How much are they going to actually do to either prevent or prepare for remediation and make it easier to recover and ease the reaction? Or are there some that are like fire extinguishers that you hope to never even pop the pin out, and it just stays there and you know it's there, and if you need it, you know you can pull it out and use it? Or do I just not waste the money on them because I've had one for 20 years, it expired, and I don't want to replace it, so I'll just won't bother?
It's an interesting discussion and concept in general. I think I always come back to the risk appetite. And I think at the end of the day, if we could get folks to think about it more from a business impact, what's the revenue impact of this service no longer being available? I'll segue to another topic, and that is you mentioned incidents. When there's a fire, the fire department will do their research to figure out what the cause of the fire was, the root cause. And when somebody's hacked and they're a Fortune 500 company, and you look at some of the casinos, that was very public, right, when they were hacked. But, the same thing's going to happen. They're going to call Atlantic Data Security to come in and help with the investigation because they want a third party. And that investigation will help pinpoint exactly what the cause was. And perhaps we could learn about that to help impact what we're going to do going forward from a cyber standpoint.
Yeah, the forensics are very important. To learn from things is great.
Yep.
Doesn't help everyone, doesn't eliminate the problem, doesn't get the money back, but it helps you make sure it doesn't happen. It helps you get closer to making sure it doesn't happen again. Makes it easier to avoid the next time as long as you know why it happened.
Right.
So learning the lessons is important. And when it comes again to insurance, it's going to be required. And for them, it's about getting out of pain. If they can prove it was your fault, you might be out and not be able to file that claim successfully.
Well, insurance companies are famous for that, for not paying out. I know that from experience.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Yeah.
I think a boiled down question is, how do you vet where you should focus your energy on being preventative or reactive, or is it a mix of both? But then from there, how do you vet who you go with? If you are, say I'm a small company and I have no idea about this, how do I even start to vet that?
And that's the even broader question of determining between different solutions. Okay, here's a smoke detector. Which one's better? Which one should, this one has carbon monoxide as well. This one will call the fire department for me if it detects a fire. So you have to understand what those features are and maybe which of those features matter to you.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's probably a whole different episode. In fact, it is going to be a whole different episode where we talk more about the vendor vetting and defining what they do. A lot of it just comes down to understanding where they play, but also understanding your needs. As you mentioned, what's your appetite for disaster?
What's your appetite for risk?
Is this your third home? So if it burns down, you'll be okay, while you rebuild. Or is it, no, we can't afford this, since we have our printed photos and albums. We really have no appetite for disaster here. So we're going to spend a lot more to prevent it. Maybe even put a fire suppression system in. There's a whole different, I can think of the analogy for this from a cyber standpoint.
Right.
But as opposed to just detecting and calling the fire department, detecting and turning on the sprinklers.
Right.
Which will put out the fire. They'll do water damage, but that's the part of that risk analysis of, is that what we need to make sure the fire goes out immediately? Yeah, we lose soft goods and paper things, but at least the house stays. And that's, but that comes down to that cost, because a fire suppression system is massively expensive. versus just calling the fire department. That you just need a phone line. And that's that cost analysis of how much is it worth to spend on prevention for the risk it mitigates. And that's
So is part of that about what you're really willing, what's important to not put at risk in the preventative stage, then, is what I'm hearing. Like, if I don't want to risk my photos, but I'm okay with water damage, is that what?
well, that comes down to what's replaceable. Sure, you can't replace those photos if the paper, the prints burn, they're gone. If you don't have copies of them somewhere else, they're gone. So either you have to put them in a fireproof safe in the house. That's one way to mitigate the risk to them, or make copies of them and store them somewhere else. That's a prep of, they might burn, but I've got a backup.
Right.
And those are different solutions potentially to that risk, or different mitigations of the risk. And with digital, you see something similar. And ransomware is a great example of this. You can do everything you can to try and prevent it. A lot of that is user awareness, making sure they don't know not to click these things, protecting the data itself. Rights management is a huge part of that, making sure that average users don't have the authority to go and encrypt volumes of data. There's all sorts of solutions to help minimize the potential to be ransomed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also preparedness for what if you get ransomed? What if I have backups offsite nightly? So I got ransomed. I'll just wipe everything out and restore from a backup. That's one other answer to it.
Right.
If you think it's not preventable. But there's another that I think you have a story about as well. That's a way to be prepared for ransomware.
Right. Well, and you mentioned photos. If you're a hospital, you care about medical records. Hopefully you're backing those up. But I have a personal story that I found very enlightening and made me more passionate about what I do here at Ingram Micro. So I was in Louisiana with my cousins. This was about 3 years ago for the 4th of July. I woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee, sat down, and then my cousin's husband woke up right after I did the same thing, grabbed a cup of coffee, and we sat down. And his first question to me is, what do you do for a living? What is your job entail? And I responded in really 2 words: cybersecurity. I work with companies to better their cybersecurity practice. And when I said that to him, my cousin's husband's Todd, his eyes lit up, and he could not wait to tell me a story of how he has been on the opposite side of a security hack. And he's worked for this hospital system for a number of years. And he said, oh gosh, about 2 or 3 years ago, we experienced our first hack. And he said in that situation, his IT team was not prepared and he lost medical records. So that forced him to have to spend a weekend stitching together the medical records, because you need those medical records to deliver a level of care where you can charge the patient, right? So you can, facilitate revenue collection or revenue. And so he spent the better part of a weekend and late at night putting together the medical records. And so if you think about the business impact of that to my cousin, it just adds a lot of stress to what he does. But again, it comes back to business impact. Business impact, we can't see patients, we can't charge, we can't make money. And so he went on to say that it's gotten so bad from a hacking perspective that their CFO has a Bitcoin account in Coinbase. So that when they're hacked and they need their files unencrypted, the CFO can make a payment in Bitcoin to the hackers. And he said this has happened repeatedly. And he said hospitals around the country are experiencing the same issue. And really what it comes down to, Eric, and you'll have an appreciation for this, is a lack of IT resources to throw at the cybersecurity problem. They don't even have a security team at this hospital. They have 2 or 3 IT folks that are doing everything.
So let me try and make an analogy, go back to our analogy for this and map out a scenario. So no smoke detectors, no fire extinguishers, no ability to call 911, Instead, they have a builder on contract and retainer so that if a house burns down, they can rebuild it at their cost.
Yep.
So there's no insurance, no nothing. It's going to
They
happen
might as
again.
well be giving out matches.
We're going to be
front.
ransomed. We're not going to try and stop it. We'll just have the account ready so we can pay them faster.
Yeah, it's almost akin to
I hate that.
these wealthy individuals that live in South Florida, right? Or across the state of Florida, where it's gotten so expensive to have home insurance that it's to the point now where some very wealthy, affluent individuals are saying, hey, I'll take on that level of risk. If I lose my house, I've got money that I can use to rebuild and restore. But clearly that's not the situation for the vast majority of homeowners in this country.
Well,
Right?
it goes back to the equation. If they're going to charge you $10,000 a month in premiums and your house is worth $250,000, in 2 years, if you keep putting that $10,000 away in your own bank or somewhere, you could just afford to rebuild your house without the insurance.
Correct.
And that comes down to the likelihood or the frequency of losing your house. If it's every 10 years, the insurance probably isn't worth it because you could save up more than that by just socking your own money away and becoming your own insurer.
Right.
And the insurance, if it's that far out of whack, the insurance companies are adjusting all wrong, and they need to think about that and they will, I'm sure, and adjust it because they want to be the more affordable option, but still need to be making money.
Yeah, correct.
That's interesting. But the ransomware, that I hate that story in the sense that it's wrong. It's the wrong way to do it. It's probably more affordable for them to at least put in some prevention.
Yeah.
To put in some better mitigation plan.
Yeah.
To have a backup, to have a DR site, to have the data replicated, rather than just pay, because even the paying isn't foolproof.
Right.
There's no guarantee that they'll get the data decrypted or timely.
Yeah.
And they might still, patient care could still suffer, or the breach could be more than just the data. And in medical, we know there's a lot of other potential issues where they breach the network and take devices offline.
Right.
And that can immediately affect care and affect patient health. So that worries me a lot that they're doing this. We'll just pay it when we have to versus at least try a little bit to stop it.
Yeah. And what I would love to see the industry get to at some point is helping end users allocate their budget appropriately. A certain percent should go to cybersecurity if you're the CIO at a hospital system. And then, say 10 or 15% of the security budget should be allocated to vulnerability management and or zero trust. And I think that's what we need to get to. And we're in a position as an industry to start advocating for that. And then just doing some benchmarking and some market research to find out, okay, this is the right level.
Yeah. Kind of forcing the analysis of the equation, or forcing you to actually do that analysis and figure out what it is. Because again, a lot of us don't do the thought ahead of doing the work. Like, oh, I know I need to do this thing. I'll just do this thing.
Right.
Should you be doing something else instead? And what would be the better benefit? Should I be investing more? And this goes back to the question, should I invest more in prevention?
Mm-hmm.
Or have I done everything that's reasonable already?
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing, I could do a little more, but the cost of that additional piece isn't worth the benefit. And that's where you reach that point of, okay, so now maybe that money would be better spent on, in the unlikely event that something does happen, being prepared, because it is both. You need to have that if something happens, because you can never be 100% with either.
Right.
You can't just say, I suppose if you work in hospitals in Louisiana, maybe you can say, we'll do nothing to prevent it. We'll just pay when it happens. I still think the wrong way, but you can never guarantee 100% it won't happen. So take it to the most reasonable level for you of we've gotten it 90% of the way foolproof at a reasonable price.
Mm-hmm.
That additional, now each of those percentage points beyond that is going to be cost prohibitive. It's going to get more and more expensive to sharp those little tiny things.
Good point.
But again, that's subjective, and it's not like it's 90 for everybody. Some people will be 50%. And
Right.
now the cost to eliminate the additional risk is so ridiculous and unlikely that we'll focus on the remediation or the reactive side of things and make sure we have a good disaster plan, which we didn't even talk about. And that's just having some idea of what you will do if it does happen.
Yeah, well, it's about signing up for the risk, but we need to know what we're signing up for. And some CFOs, I guess, have a risk appetite where they're okay with having that service impacted. What's ironic, this past weekend, I was back in Louisiana with the same family. And I told my cousin's husband, I've been using what you told me about the issues at your hospital. I've been using it with my customers and colleagues at Ingram. And I refer to it as having coffee on the bayou with my cousin's husband. And he said, as a matter of fact, yes, we continue to be impacted. In fact, last week, I think on a Tuesday or Wednesday, the entire hospital's internet was down. So they couldn't get access to some of their medical records that are stored outside of the hospital system. So everything was written down on pen and paper, with the understanding that if you are making these notes, then you're going to have to update your medical records at some point. And that's what they're doing.
First of all, I love the coffee on the bayou. That term, that should be a podcast. If it isn't already, somebody down there is probably already. I was just in New Orleans a few weeks ago myself. Cafe Du Monde.
I love New Orleans. I think it's a great podcast name. You obviously have to start one.
I know Cafe Du Monde is my go-to. There's also Cafe Beignet. But it's Cafe au lait is the coffee. It's just coffee and milk.
Yes,
is a very French term, but
yes,
I love my Cafe au lait.
It's one of my favorite places to go in New Orleans is Cafe Du Monde.
Yes.
We did partake in that over the weekend on Saturday.
Beignets. Cafe au lait and beignet.
Hot beignets and coffee. Don't get any better than that.
No, I love it. In fact, one of my children is a big fan of Cafe Du Monde coffee now and gets the cans. I got them hooked on it. So
that's neat.
And that's up here. So it's definitely good stuff with the chicory. It's that little chicory. Yeah, it's good stuff. If anyone hasn't tried it, Cafe Du Monde, you can get it on Amazon.
This
I'm like, Eric, are you doing a plug? What is this?
We don't like to plug products at all, but I just did.
So this podcast is being brought to you by Cafe Du Monde.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, are they paying us? What's happening?
But so coffee on the bayou, I love the idea. So you've made this more of a regular thing with them to try and at least be a bit of an advisor to them, which is great. And hopefully they're making some progress and rethinking some of the issues that need rethinking.
Well, it's ironic you say that. So what my cousin's husband learned 3 or 4 years ago through, experience is that he backs up his medical records locally onto a hard drive that he can remove from the network. So when they are hacked, which they are hacked, and they lose their medical records, he's got a backup.
So he does have a plan, but it's a fully reactive solution.
It's reactive.
As opposed to a proactive solution. Keep it from happening.
It's just for him.
Yeah.
He's the only one that's doing that. The IT team is not mandated that you back up. What the IT team should be doing is backups for all of their endpoints.
Correct. Well, for all of their data, for everything, but also protection.
Yes.
Not just about the remediation, and it's going to happen. We can't stop it. Again, that's just like, all right, we'll just have fire extinguishers in every room. Or everybody walk around with a fire extinguisher all the time and play with matches all you want, but we have our extinguishers so we can put it out when it happens. It's not really a solution.
But what he's doing is a bit of a mixture of proactive and reactive. He's backing it up beforehand, right? And then it's
proactive reactivity.
Right. He's
proactively planning to remediate, but he's not preventing.
Yeah.
Which
one outweighs
any preparedness is proactivity, but it's not prevention.
So from both of your standpoints, which one matters more?
To come back, can we answer the question?
Well, we're engineers, so
I'm an engineer too.
We can always answer the question, and you know how engineers think, Chelsea, because you're an engineer as well. I think it's got to come down to the industry getting ahead of this. We Gartner will say, okay, a certain percent of your IT budget should be devoted to security if you're in this industry. I think we need to take that further. I think we need to say, okay, of your security budget, if I'm spending $100 on IT in general, I should spend. Let me take a step back. If I were in IT I would advocate for 10 to 15% of my security budget going to being proactive, right? So that level of proactiveness would require vulnerability management. We have a conversation at the board level in terms of the risks that we're willing to sign up for, but we know our risk and we know the business impact. And, CISOs are not in the business of e-commerce. They're in the business of facilitating these business services.
Yeah. So I think the answer, again, it's one of those non-answers. It's very subjective. Mm-hmm. Depends on the industry, depends on the business, depends on profitability. Is there extra budget to be able to do more? I think the more proactive you can be, the better off you'll be. But it doesn't mean be entirely proactive and have no plan for if something does happen, because there's always the possibility. Again, like we said, even if you do everything to eliminate the risk of fire, you can't control lightning. If you could, that'd be impressive. But there's always going to be some factor that you can't control, that you don't expect. So you still have to have a plan for what if. You still need to have that insurance. You still need to have that remediation plan, procedure, backups, especially when it's minimal cost. The backup hard drive is not super expensive.
Right.
That's a very reasonable cost for some preparedness, which is proactive to have the drive and to back up to it. But it's only there if you need to react to a data loss. So it's preparing for a reactive response, but it's minimal cost, minimal effort, very worthwhile for anyone. And for anyone, back up your photos, whether it's to a hard drive or cloud somewhere. Just have multiple copies of your personal photos because you don't want to lose those.
Correct.
Assuming we all have digital photos at this point. And it's not that difficult. You don't have to have it backed up in 17 places. That's unreasonable. It's more than you need to, more cost and trouble, but take reasonable steps to have backup and be prepared to be reactive, but take reasonable steps to be proactive and prevent things from happening in the first place. As long as you've done whatever's reasonable on both sides, maybe we're getting to an answer. Take reasonable steps on both sides of being proactive and reactive. And then anything else you do beyond what's reasonable to be more effective could go kind of either way. And that's going to be where it's very subjective.
Correct.
It doesn't make sense to have 3 backups for me, or does it make sense for me to put it into more fire prevention? Having home inspections on a monthly basis to make sure I haven't used bad, surge protectors or something.
It depends on your environment.
Sure.
Like which way you go, And
that's what it comes down to, 100%.
Yeah. So I think I like the reasonable steps on both sides, reactive, proactive, and then the extra effort depends on you, your environment, your company, your organization, and where your specialties are. It might be that you've got people that are really good at doing one thing or another and makes it easier. Yes, we'll be more preventative, or we'll be more prepared to be reactive.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect is that we as CISOs or security professionals, we need help in selling the value of what we do. And that could be an entire podcast in itself, right? But, IT and security teams are not the best communicators in the world. But what I would advocate for is the security professionals need to start to put together their case studies for how they communicate upwards to the executive team. It always comes down to business value. Am I doing something that's impacting the business in a positive way? Well, CISOs need to communicate that. So how do I get more money to be proactive? I got to make sure that I'm selling myself and communicating the value we deliver.
I think that's a good point, where the answer is at least put some thought into it.
Correct.
At least care, which is part of what we try to do, is think of things a little differently. If you've never thought about whether you're spending on reactive or proactive, hopefully now you at least think about it. Consider,
I was going to say,
whether you're doing too much of one or the other. But that's the idea. At least have the discussion, do some self-analysis, some introspection. And maybe you're doing it all right, or maybe you can make some little adjustments once you analyze what you're doing. And that also comes back to the idea of assessments and audits and just having others sometimes come in and talk to you. If you have advisors that you work with, ask them, what are we doing? Should we be more one or the other? Is that, what, from your opinion, your experience? So that's where advisors do come in, and hopefully you have those relationships. There's someone you can ask. There's so
But
many other things you touched on
maybe
that
the
could be whole episodes
advocation.
too. Education is huge.
Education is huge.
Yeah. Knowing what you don't know is,
Well, no, I was saying maybe that statement right there could change the way people view certain things. You know what I mean?
and where they put their focus and to
Yeah.
do better.
So I love that.
Well, an example would be: do you realize what the number one attack vector is? It's email security or business email compromise.
Yeah.
You touched on education, Chelsea. You touched on education just now. That's tantamount to what we should be doing. I mean, email security, endpoint, firewalls, those three things need to be in place. That covers about 60, 80% of what you need. But if we understand the risk, we know that the greatest risk is one of our employees opening up a malicious email. And what can we do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah. Well, it's a great example, again, not to go back to earlier in the conversation, but simple example of preventative versus reactive. Proactive is security awareness.
Go.
Let people know, don't click these things. But it's incredibly not foolproof. It's please don't do these things. There's nothing to help make it not happen other than the education. So you try to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the user error. But that's got so much margin for error. It's not a foolproof preventative measure. So you need to have other proactive measures, which are still proactive, the email security itself, that blocks the malicious content or blocks access to that malicious site that they clicked on a bad link. So you've got other layers of proactive defenses and prevention built in there. But then the reactive is still, all right, something did happen. Can we minimize? And you get into, we could dive down so many different areas like segmentation and compartmentalization, rights management to make sure even if they did click it, they don't have authority. So I don't want to dive into so many rabbit holes, but I love that. So I think there's that balance and a mix of answers, but at least thinking about it and talking about it with your folks, with your team, with your advisors is going to help make progress and maybe get you, make some light bulbs go off, that realization of, oh, we should be doing this or that.
Yeah, that's what I was really getting at, is that I feel like there's not a lot of advocacy for the needs of people in like cybersecurity a lot of the time. And so I love that, Jimmy, you just did that.
The other avenue I don't want to go down today, I'd love to, and I know we've talked about this before, is the idea of one of the simplest things people can do is simplifying itself. We've gotten so complex. Again, another tangent we could run down. Maybe another day we'll have you back and talk about simplification, yes. Because part of this is just things have gotten so complicated and we've just added more and more technology on top of everything. In many cases, it's redundant and unnecessary. We've got 7 of the same thing, but all different. And simplifying makes it a lot easier to get your head around and provide better security. So just in the discussion, we're doing it a disservice if we don't at least mention the idea of, if you can simplify the problem, all that analysis becomes easier. And then therefore the solutions become easier to visualize and to implement if you've simplified all the factors.
I never thought I would love analogies, but that was what I was actually really excited about this call for. Is it feels like I'm having a discussion with, like, I'm not talking to someone who's trying to outsmart me or something. They're explaining something to me in a way that makes sense. And so, but something I need to know, you know? And so that's what, these are like my favorite people to have on here, who can dumb stuff down for people like me, you know? I love that.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, what we're doing here is very similar to what CISOs and CIOs need to do with their business partners, right? We can't be talking in our IT vernacular. And again, it comes down to value. So when CIOs and CISOs are engaging with business, they need to keep it simple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. A lot of the folks that I lecture to and speak to and present to, they understand it. So a lot of times when I use analogies and make these comparisons, it's to help them with conveying it to others, to their bosses and to their users who need to understand this in another way. And they can often relate once you kind of, and it's not dumbing down. It's saying, you shouldn't know this. This is not your job.
Right.
Here's something that I know you understand. And if I
Right.
can draw those comparisons, now you can understand this without having to do all the schooling and the reading to really understand it. And even if you don't see it, trust me, this is a connection. Fire insurance is similar to cyber insurance. And you need it, but you don't want to use it.
It's not dumbing it down. It's making things make sense that people need to care about, but we don't know that we need to care about them because they've never made sense to us sometimes.
And it doesn't have to be scary and super difficult. Let's make it a little easier.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing, is simplifying the conversation in many cases. It's
cybersplaining.
That's it.
Yeah. And you guys are in a great position to help your customers do exactly that.
We like to think so. It's what we've been doing for a while. It's what led to Cybersplainers in the first place. It's something I've been doing for years, trying to simplify and explain and all in the interest of moving the needle and being more secure. That's really the goal, is to help through different discussions. Because one of the frustrations, and not to dive down this either, but part of the reason for doing this is years of not frustration, but seeing that we're chasing after the wrong things because of marketing, because of trends, because of excitement, because of just misguided and being misled down the wrong paths of do this new thing. And we're missing some simpler things we could sometimes be doing that would be more valuable. And having these simple-ish discussions in a different way, framing it in a different way, I think can be helpful. It's been helpful for me. And I've been told it's been helpful for others I've had some of these discussions with. So I think that's kind of our overall, not to go back to our purpose, but hopefully this fits in line with that. And having different perspectives is really what helps us as well add to that. And I thank you again for being here, Jimmy, with us to help share your story. Coffee on the Bayou, coming soon to a podcast platform near you. It's probably already there. Somebody's already doing it.
That's a great name for a podcast.
I'm going to go try to trademark that.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah, I better do it before this podcast comes out.
Yeah, before we launch this.
All right. Well, again, thanks.
Okay, guys, I have to hop. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for joining us. You have been such a pleasure. And I will talk to you guys later.
As always, Chelsea.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, everybody stay safe.
Yes. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.